Next on the docket, the Sheldon Silver case. Former Assembly Speaker, one of the three men in the room, as commonly known, and he was, of course, convicted of corruption last year. Prosecutors, they're saying they want him locked up for at least 10 years, but now Silver, for his part, apologizing, sending a letter to the court saying, in part, I have failed the people of New York. What I have done has hurt the Assembly and New York and my constituents terribly, and I regret that more than I can possibly express. And his wife has also sent a letter appealing to the court because her husband has prostate cancer, saying in part, Your Honor is aware of Shelley's health issues, and it terrifies me that his father and brother both died from the same kind of cancer. Please give him as lenient a sentence as possible. So the question is, will that impact the judge when Silver is sentenced next month? I'm going to get to the politics and what justice should or shouldn't be in 1 second, but first, the condition bill of a person as it relates to their health, its sentencing, and factoring in age. Take the crime out for a moment. How much does that impact sentencing?
Well, it's a substantial mitigating factor. He's 73 years old, and the government's asking for a sentence in excess of 10 years. You know, that could very easily mean that it would be a life sentence for him. His health condition is obviously something that also factors into the equation. It's not just age at life expectancy, it's also the fact that this is a complicating factor that could shorten his life. So I think every judge, given the sentencing issues that they're confronted with, take all of the factors into consideration. Certainly his age and his health would be two of them.
Richard, what should the public's expectation be when it holds people of authority, whether they are judges, whether they're officers of the court as attorneys and they break a law, or in the case of legislators who are not only there to uphold the law, but also be entrusted with their office that they don't abuse said office.
Someone who commits a crime should be punished.
Should they be treated differently than if it was a plumber doing graft rather than a...
The law doesn't permit that.
Okay, but there is discretion, as we just heard, when it comes to sentencing.
Right.
So when exercising discretion, how much of a...
It's based on the nature of the crime. It's based on the way in which... Look, you asked about whether he should get mercy. I'm not so sure that mercy is the standard that I would apply to this. He's entitled to justice. He's entitled to be treated for the actions he's been convicted of, nothing more, nothing less. The notion that there are murderers who aren't spending...
Okay, but let me be clear for 1 second before you go ahead. I've heard other people say on his behalf, look at all the good works that he's done as a lawmaker. If you're saying you should only judge him on the actions that got him convicted, okay, you're not saying that anything preceding that in his time in his office should matter either.
I'm not saying that. Both the good and the ill get looked at for sentencing purposes. But I guess in the end...
But aren't you having it both ways then?
No. The sentencing procedure is set out in law. The judges
have discretion.
Has discretion, and they should use that discretion. The point of it is 10 years in jail for those crimes intuitively fair, intuitively just?
I take it from you it's not. So I'm putting a robe on you, Justice Brodsky. What would justice be for Sheldon Silver?
What I would do? I don't know. 3 to 5 years for a man that age with his health conditions, with his mixed record in public life, and understanding the nature of the crime he's convicted of.
See, I think I have to disagree for one reason, because doing a lot of federal work. If we were talking about a state case, I would agree with you. But you have to understand the federal sentencing guidelines have a certain structure to them. So public officials, public corruption cases are treated differently because there is an aggravating factor which escalates the guidelines for breach of public trust. So when you have a public official who engages in politically corrupt acts, then the public is harmed, and that's a breach of public trust. And so that results in an aggravating factor which kicks up the guideline range. Secondly, had he pled guilty, then he would have gotten a break on that. That would have reduced the sentencing guideline structure. To come in and apologize for your misdeeds when you pled not guilty and took the issue to trial. No, I'm just explaining to you.
I'm not defending his behavior, his letter.
No.
I just don't know that 10 years for a 72-year-old man for the crimes he was convicted of makes intuitive sense.
But here's what I'm saying. What I'm saying to you is that because he was a public official.
I get it.
In the federal system, you're not really sentenced only for the crime you committed, because the crime you committed may have different impacts based upon what
Although a judge still does, and I agree with you, Bill, a judge still does have the discretion to compare breach of public trust with other breach of public trust. So what exactly did he do? Was there personal enrichment? All of those things should come into consideration as well.
But Mayo, you worked in the district attorney's office. If a regular guy walked in and let's say stole $100 here from a register versus an ADA doing it, should be the same exact penalty for both, or should there be an expectation that somebody who not only knows the law, and maybe I didn't do the best analogy, but also knows the levers of justice and everything else, should I expect more from you than the guy who reached into the till?
Personally, outside of the law, yes, I would. But I got to go back to what Richard said. When you really stop and think about it, it's about what's just. There's not a separate standard of law for people, although outside of taking into account, breach of public trust, you ought to be able to sit there, look at that individual, what was the conduct, what was the harm to society, what were the good things this person's done in their lives, what were the things that were not so great, and then at that point, what's reasonable? Because the other thing is this, you're not really helping the public if you take a 72 or 73-year-old man who's a cancer patient and you put that person in a hospital where now all of his care is on the public to fund that. He's not a threat of recidivism. He's probably a good candidate even for probation. So you have to really be able to look at it and weigh the whole thing. Each case has to be looked at individually.
Well, what about, Tom, the symbol of this? Obviously, Albany has been on trial. Preet Bharara has made sure of that, okay? And the premise that two of the three most influential office holders outside of the governor in New York State have not only been tried, they've been convicted of serious crimes. Does the symbol matter too here? And that it can't just be a probation as a penalty, because this is about more than just one man and one action.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think you want to certainly deter this behavior. I think you want to also condemn it publicly, that this individual, has to, in essence, pay for his or her crimes. On the other hand, I mean, as Bill pointed out, there's some really important mitigating circumstances here. The age of this individual, the amount he did do a lot of public service, so I think I agree with Richard as well. We had a discussion before the break. I mean, this is really not germane to his sentence, and Richard disagreed with me, but I think we should think about having a full-time legislature where legislators are not permitted to make income outside of the work that they do as legislators. Because I think having a part-time legislature just breeds this type of influence peddling, which a person has to make money from something else, and what typically happens. So, I think that there ought to be, a systemic change as well as trying to reach justice here.
We've had this debate. I don't want to lose the time I have. I happen to agree with them, but I know we have different things. This is a man you called a friend for a long time. Sheldon Silver served with him for a long time in the assembly. It's a sad story, isn't it?
It's a betrayal. It brings anger. He made his friends, anybody associated with him, look bad. And
the institution, too.
And the institution as well. Interestingly enough, though, I think the decision that the judge is going to make about a slightly different issue is going to tell you more about mercy, and that is whether he has to start serving a sentence before his appeal is heard. He's got a real appeal. I'm not saying he's right. I'm not saying he's wrong.
In what regard?
As to the appeal, as to whether there was actually a quid pro quo. It's a Supreme Court's looking at the same issues. Put aside whether he has the appeal or he doesn't, but to put him in jail before his appeal is exhausted will be very interesting.
And how about some of the other stuff that also came out in terms of not just the extramarital affairs, but also placing these people in positions? I mean, it gets more and more
just
unseen.
take a gun and shoot people when they're indicted?
Don't play that card with me. I'm saying to you, though, it did raise a separate issue, which is, okay, forget about the unseemly part of this stuff. It's not just TMZ stuff. He placed these people in jobs. Is that more common than we think in all of it?
The notion, he placed one of them in a job, not both of them. And if that's what's bothering you, let's get it right.
So let's give him credit for the good thing, and then also the thing is,
What affair wasn't it so bad?
the thing is, but to Richard's point, under the federal system, in order for the judge to be persuaded to continue him on bail pending his appeal, she has to basically make a finding that there's a substantial legal question, the outcome of which could result in a vacating of the conviction. What you're asking her to do is say, gee whiz, I may have really screwed this up. I may have made a mistake. So oftentimes judges are not willing to continue people on bail.
Even though the Supreme Court took the McConnell case in Virginia on almost identical facts.
I don't know what Judge Capone's going to do. I don't know what she's going to do.
Coming up next, everyone, ESPN, they just fired Curt Schilling. That after the former pitcher wrote a controversial Facebook post about transgender bathrooms. To me, not a fan of the guy anyway, but where's the line start and stop when it comes to free speech and employment? We'll talk about that after this.